Hey, Dad. So, I know you've gotten a lot of your news lately from TikTok and Instagram, besides catching up on YouTube and seeing what's going on there. And then occasionally, you'll send one to me and say, is this real? What do I need to know about this? What's going on? I figured that we could head that whole thing off at the pass if I started making news for you. And that's not making news, I'm not making it up, but actually curating some of the things that I read during the week and putting them together for you so that you have a couple of stories to have in your back pocket so that you know kind of more of the context of what's going on with some of these. So, Dad, for you, for the first time, I present weekly dad news. It may not be weekly, it may not always be for dads, and it may not always be news, but it'll always be me. So here we go, weekly dad news. I need a pencil. I don't need a knife. I need to dress differently. That'll work. I'm gonna keep the background because I feel like if in a safe space for you, we'll get through all this. So we're gonna cover a couple of things today. We're gonna do something international. We're gonna do something national right here. We're gonna do a little bit of sports stuff too. So with that said, let's roll the credits and get on with weekly dad news. Top of the news, first story, we're gonna be talking about the caucuses. We just had our first caucus. This is a primary caucus, so it was a Republican caucus in Iowa. The Democrats did an entirely different thing because of how badly they messed it up last year. So let's talk about the caucuses, let's talk about the primaries, let's talk about how they work and how they're not super democratic or helpful. So this Iowa caucus was a big deal because you have a bunch of people in the room. You've got Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, a couple of other people that are, just in there and floating around. And what the Republicans did is they said, okay, cool, we're gonna go ahead with the caucus. Even though it's freezing, we want you guys to come out and support whichever candidate you want. Now, the difference between a caucus and a voting primary is that in a caucus, traditionally, now they're different all over the country, but traditionally you'd get together in a room and you have to be present for a caucus. And when you get there, and I've done this, we had caucuses in Nevada up until recently, and now we do votes, and you can vote in person, but we don't do caucuses for primary or for the general. But the benefit of a caucus is that you have an opportunity to discuss the candidates, you have an opportunity to see what the support is, you have an opportunity to kind of talk about it. Traditionally, that means getting together in a room, talking about the different candidates, and then at the end of the night, they go, cool, everybody for candidate 1 over there, candidate 2 over there, candidate 3 over there, cool. Anybody want to change, anybody want to convince, move around? Now this year, the Republicans in Iowa did something slightly different. They said, we're gonna let somebody speak on behalf of each candidate, and then everybody's gonna secret ballot. And then we'll tally those up and we'll know who won. They did that, and the Republican caucuses tend to be pretty well run. This is historically true. They tend to get in there, they do their vote, and they get it taken care of. Democrats have had some issues with getting it reported, getting everybody to follow the rules and get it all turned in on time, and that's what happened with the Iowa caucuses 4 years ago. But the kicker for this year's caucus was the weather. The weather was such that with wind chill, it was below zero, low enough that if you had exposed skin, there was chances for frostbite. And since the Republican Party tends to be a little bit older, especially in Iowa, you're asking these people to put their health at risk to come and caucus. Now, with no other way to support a candidate except by going in and going, I have written it down, here's my guy, you have this complicated space in which you're kind of pushing people to go and put in more effort than really needs to be there to vote. In Nevada, we just got our primaries of ballots here for both parties, and we got our primary ballots, marked them off, send them back, we're done. It's a really low effort. The caucus system puts a lot of onus on people that don't have childcare, have to work 2 jobs, can't get out in the cold, don't drive anymore. There's a lot of people that can't really participate in a caucus in any convenient way. Where mail-in ballots are super convenient. Anytime you put additional labor on the voter to vote, you're going to lower the number of people that do vote. And I think it's important in our democracy to have as many people vote as possible. I want to know what everybody's opinion is so that we're moving in kind of that general direction. So when we're looking at how that could happen and what could be different about it, there's a lot of different things that are happening in the country already. California has an open primary. So they basically take all of the people that are running, put them in a big pool, and the top two advance to the general election. There's also instant runoff voting, which is like ranked choice, where you say, this is my number one, this is my number two, and this is my number three. And if your number one doesn't hit a certain threshold, you don't lose your ability to support a candidate. It then goes to your number two. So ranked choice voting is actually super effective for not having to vote 3 or 4 times because somebody didn't exceed 50%, or there was a tie where 2 people got 28%, and then somebody else got 15%, and somebody got, it eliminates a lot of that messiness and the time that it takes to do all that. And you have a cleaner paper trail because everybody has one ballot in the system that's floating around, not a ballot and then a ballot for the runoff and a ballot for the primary and a second ballot. It just gets messy. And so ranked choice is a really neat way to go. And open primaries are a really neat way to go. There's also a space in there for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to kind of put themselves back into being able to respond to this pull that's been happening, this gerrymandered push to the outsides. So as long as we have these super, super safe Republican districts and super, super safe Democratic districts, we're looking at a situation in which that district can represent or can elect somebody to go on to the primary that doesn't necessarily reflect everybody in that area. But because it's so tight, you don't have a lot of ability for centrist candidates to come to the top. So in looking at that, I think that ranked choice is a super interesting way to go, where you just kind of go, here's my number 1, 2, and 3. They can be Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Green Party. I don't care. It just opens it up so much for other ideas and other discussions to get in there. And it also gives you the ability to go, I want this guy for 3 of his policies, but if I can't get him, this is my safety. And not spoil, right? So if Joe Manchin ends up running as an independent and we have a Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, Trump, and then that gets pulled apart like Ross Perot did back when he ran against Clinton and Bush, if we have that kind of a pull apart, all of a sudden that matters. Those 3% votes matter, those 5% of votes matter. We saw this when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump too. There were a lot of just votes that they voted for other people, and they should have a say in what the outcome is of the election. So I think ranked choice is a good thing. I don't know when that'll happen. The other kicker for all of this is that the primaries are still run by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And so as long as that's happening too, you don't have any room for independents, Green parties to kind of muscle in and be a part of the conversation. So ranked choice is cool. I like the idea of open primaries, jungle primaries they call them. And then I also really like the idea of getting rid of the electoral college. But we'll probably cover that when it comes closer to November and we have to figure out who we're voting for at that time. So that's our US story. That was the Iowa caucus. We got a whole bunch more going through. Like I said, Nevada, we've gotten our ballots. Some people have sent them in. Across the country, we're gonna go in next one's Super Tuesday, March 5th. There's some in February. All kinds of stuff going on, right? So that'll play out. We'll see what happens. There is, of course, a pallor hanging all over all of this with the criminal cases, and we'll see how that all washes up. We're gonna take a minute now and have a sports story. And for that sports story, we're gonna go to our sports correspondent in the gym, Justin. Justin, are you there? Do you wanna take it from me? Thanks, Justin. What a week we're in. This is a great week for sports. We're in playoffs for the NFL. That means that there's games that are happening that'll end up with a Super Bowl and 2 teams smashing each other while we watch a bunch of commercials, eat Tostitos, eat Fritos, and get super fat and happy off of nachos and chicken wings and beer. But before that happens, we gotta go through the playoffs. And we had something interesting happen in the last week. We had our first streaming-only football game in the playoffs. So they've had streaming-only games before. Both Amazon's tried some of that, and Paramount Plus is now the one that's doing it mostly. Where that hits different is that for the longest time, I mean, if you take me, for example, back in the 70s, my family had tickets to the Chargers when they were still at Balboa Stadium. We kept those season tickets up until they moved to LA. It was just a bummer to see them go, and it really kind of wrenched the heart of San Diego. But during that whole time we were watching them, they had blackouts occasionally where they hadn't sold enough tickets, so they wouldn't play the game on local television to try and get you to buy a ticket and go to the game. That kind of fit into the model that they had, where they made money in a couple of different ways. From the broadcast rights, from the ticket sales, and then from the advertising and sponsorships that clip on the streaming or the display ads that were put on the TVs and the ads that were in the stadium itself. So all those things compounded to make for a fundamental way and model for that money to be made in football. Now the NFL is experimenting with something extremely different. This playoff game that just happened, and it was between the Dolphins and the Chiefs, it was the most streamed live event ever. 23 million between streaming and local affiliates. Those local affiliates were just in the Dolphins and Chiefs home areas, right? So if you're in Miami, if you're in Kansas City, you could turn on the TV and watch it. If you were anywhere else, you couldn't. You had to pony up and pay Paramount to watch it. A lot of people already had Paramount accounts through things like their Showtime Paramount subscriptions, or they had one through their local CBS affiliate. Some people even had 30 days free with codes that they got from anything from South Park to signing up for an Apple device. But the end of this is, they had 23 million between streaming and local affiliates. Another game earlier in the day between the Texans and the Browns, it averaged 29 million across NBC, Telemundo, and streaming, which was Peacock. And that combined number being 6 million more and a lower stakes game in the playoffs means that they're missing eyeballs, but they consider it a success. Why is that? How does that model work? What does it mean for us? And are there examples in history? The answer to all of those questions are right at the end of the media shift landscape. We're going to look real quick at newspapers and how newspapers have changed their model in response to the ways that they make money and how that relates to what's happening now. So if you think about the beginning of newspapers, they started as broadsheets. I'm sure you remember Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, things like that, single sheets that ran around. But the beginning distribution model for newspapers was Newsies, was a guy going, hey, I have a news, you should hear this news. And to get people to buy the newspaper, they'd have crazy, outlandish things they'd yell. They go, murder, blood everywhere, page 7, to get you to buy the newspaper. When you do, when you turn to page 7, it was a minor accident with a shaver. It wasn't a big deal. But that way of selling it, that headline grabbed people and pulled them in. So that meant that the news was catering to that. And you fall into this space where you have yellow journalism with William Randolph Hearst and the other publishers pushing international wars and pushing big headline things because that sells papers. It kind of influences what gets put in the papers. So they shifted a little bit when they started doing subscription model. When you could subscribe to the newspaper and have it delivered to your house, maybe by me. I was a paper boy, but I delivered the newspaper everybody threw away, the Wednesday and Sunday periodical full of advertisements. If you had that paper delivered to your house, you were paying a subscription fee and you were locked in from anywhere for 6 months to a year to 2 years, and they knew they had that revenue. It's what enabled New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Business Weekly, all of those magazines to be able to do really in-depth journalism. Subscriptions to National Geographic supported people flying all over the world and taking phenomenal pictures and exposing the world to tribes and indigenous cultures and animals and plants that we never heard of or seen, these biomes that are outside of our normal experience and imagination. That was supported by a subscription model. The point here is that when you have to sell the headline's more important than the content. When you've already sold a subscription, you have time to do the content and the headline doesn't matter as much. Okay, where am I going with all of this? Well, as we've watched the media landscape change and everything is switching over to search engine optimized and click-throughs, we're seeing that happen for normal media. where a lot of the news aggregators are just trying to get a headline that'll get clicks so they can sell ads. Because at that point, your eyeballs are the product, and the money they make is from ads. So the important thing is as much throughput as possible. The other side of that, the subscription model, means that it's already been sold. They have a locked-in set of eyeballs, and now they can sell ads that belong to that set of eyeballs and not have to worry about the ad revenue as much because they have the subscription model. Now, with this last thing that the NFL did, throwing this game out to Paramount Plus, and Paramount locking it up and going, you've got to pay us to watch it, we watched it with ads, and we subscribed to it. Now, the cable model's been around for a long time, but before that, there were 3 channels to watch it on: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Those came over the air, and you watched a fuzzy 320 by 240 picture, maybe 640 by 480, but it was this, go back and look. That footage is bad. It looks really, really awful. You can't follow the game. You can't tell what's going on. You're actually better off going and being there in person to watch that football game. And when you're there in person, you're spending too much on hot dogs. You're spending too much on tickets, but you're getting that experience. You're able to see the game and engage with the game. As technology has improved, we're at a point now where they have the camera flying over the top like it's a ball. We have the instant renders where the field's in 3D and the players are, and they'll recreate the whole drive. That's phenomenal. The home viewing experience is a better way to watch the game than live in person. But the experience of watching a game with other people, whether that's in a bar or at the stadium itself, is amazing still. So you have this weird split where depending on how you experience the game, you're getting a slightly different game. But what is consistent is that we are now at a point where you pay on both ends and you don't increase value for your money. You're gonna get ads, you're gonna get sponsorships, you're gonna get inserted, branded Budweiser stuff no matter where you're watching the game, even though you paid for it. So if this structure keeps going to the point where you have to subscribe or you have to pay for a new service for each game, and they divide each game up amongst the streaming services, does that hit a point where we're commodified on both sides? We have to jump through hoops to watch a game they're making money with advertisements on. They're taking us on both sides. They're selling us, they're selling the advertisers, and they're just pocketing all of that. This falls in line with all the ways they're exploiting these systems. I mean, the owners group won't let cities own teams anymore. Green Bay Packers are an excellent example of what could happen. The Green Bay area owns that team. They're not gonna leave Green Bay. But then you get these owners who move the Chargers to LA, and now you have a double football team market that can't support it. It's not like New York Giants and New York Jets, who both happen to play in New Jersey. You're now in this place where everything costs money. Access to see it costs money. Access to the game costs money. And then once you've paid to be in that ecosystem, they're gonna sell your eyeballs to advertisers. And that double hit is massively possible for the NFL, but it makes a worse experience for all of us. We have to go in and sign into these things over and over again, and it's super frustrating. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but that's the shape of sports in America today. Back to you, Justin. That is a very interesting way to look at that. I live in Nevada, and so we've got the Raiders now. They don't really feel like our home team. Chargers leaving San Diego. They don't feel like a home team anymore. I've talked to people in LA, they don't feel like a home team to them there either, so there's that. I'm a big fan of the Golden Knights right now, so congratulations, NFL. You've pushed me to the NHL, and now I'm a hockey stan. Really appreciate that. Nice reporting on the sports, Justin. Our next story, we're gonna talk about pirates. We're specifically gonna talk about a new set of pirates that popped up. So before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about how weird piracy is. So modern day piracy is extremely different, obviously, from the golden age of piracy when it was basically the French and the Dutch and the English going, you're a privateer, go raid other people's shipping lanes. And take those spoils. And eventually, there's break off and there's the whole actual pirates who were not beholden to French, Dutch, Portuguese, or the French, Dutch, Portuguese, English. English, right there. They were just kind of libertine, and they had very interestingly democratic ways. So those pirates are one class of pirates. There's another class of pirates that the US has dealt with before. In the 1801 to 1805, the Barbary War, we were fighting with the northern coast of Africa because every time we'd go back and forth shipping stuff to Europe and go through the Mediterranean, ships were getting seized and the people were being taken as slaves. All their food was being taken off, all the goods were being taken off, and they were being seized by these Barbary Coast pirates. And the Barbary Coast is the northern African coast, Algiers, all that stuff right along the bottom of the Mediterranean. Those guys kept doing that, and we pushed back on them, and we had this war with pirates. It gave us the shores of Tripoli from the Marine Fight Song. We were moderately successful in our war against the pirates, but then we got distracted, took care of some stuff at home, had the War of 1812, and then once we were done with the War of 1812, we turned our eye back and went, oh, the pirates are back. Those pirates on the northern coast of Africa are messing with us again. And they were messing with us in such a way that we responded with a terrifying display of force. We sent the USS Independence and almost every naval vessel we had to go blockade Algiers under the command of Stephen Decatur. He took all these ships over there, sat off coast, and said, every single ship that leaves, we will sink or seize. Every single ship that comes in, we will sink or seize. If you want to talk to us, we're only doing it on my ship. Come and see me. And so the head of Algiers came out and he goes, well, what? And they talk to these politicians in Algiers, these people that are like the ruling class, and they say, you've got two choices. One, we keep doing this, and not only do we keep doing this, but we are going to bomb your ports, crush your economy, and just destroy any opportunity you have for shipping trade with the rest of the Mediterranean and the world. Because below northern Africa is a giant desert called the Sahara, so they couldn't really go south. Algeria says, okay, what's our other option? And they say, you cease all forms of tribute, you release every single American and European hostage, and you dissemble your pirate state. And Algiers complied. We eliminated that threat to our naval traffic, or our trading traffic with a naval blockade and a naval push. This is important because that only works when you have a state to fight against that's supporting them. We are now seeing raids by Houthis, which are in Yemen, and the Houthis are this group that's kind of in charge of a place that has no infrastructure, no money, no trade. They don't have anything. But what they're doing is they're shooting missiles at and destroying shipping vessels in the Red Sea, and then taking all of that stuff that they can get that's floating and trading it off and kind of going and doing it. But they're doing all this kind of at the behest of Iran. And so recently we got in there and we jumped out and we targeted Houthi missiles with countermeasures. We say, stop it. We've shot a dozen or so targets with more than 100 missiles. And we rattle our saber in the press saying, this is the beginning of the conversation. We don't like what you're doing. But the kicker is that the incentive for the Houthis to do this has very little to do with economics. Well, that's not fair. They're not overtly trying to be like, oh, we need money, we're going to be pirates because we need money. They're going, we need money, and Iran is just giving us all this stuff to attack American shipping lanes. Cool, we'll do that. So it is money, but it's also, it's more this weird buying the cheapest labor to offshore your, not terrorism, but your fight, because Iran doesn't want to get in a war with America. It does not want to do that, especially with everything that's happening in Israel and in the Ukraine. It's kind of a mess. So to pull us in another direction would not be a good idea. So they don't want to do that. So right now we've got the Houthis that are acting as their proxy. We can't do what we did in the Barbary Coast and just go in and smash up the Iranians. They're not really in it. If we start doing that, then we sit in the hypocrisy of, well, here's all these weapons that we put in Afghanistan, here's all these weapons that we put in Iraq. Yeah, we set that up. We've never been accountable for that. But in this case, there's no clear way to kind of put Iran on the defensive and say, hey, we need to fix this. So we're at a war with pirates. There's no clear way out of it right now. But when you hear about the Houthis in the news and what they're doing, recognize that they are pirates being supported by a third state that doesn't want to directly engage with us. And so everything we're doing, we're going, yeah, we're getting the Houthis. As long as we're just attacking the Houthis and chasing down their weapon stores and stocks, it doesn't go to the root of the problem, which is that Iran is sending them all kinds of stuff. So that's the news around the Houthis. That is the end of this week's Weekly Dad News. This is the third week of January 2024. So in this third week of January 2024, I hope those help out and give you something in your back pocket so that while you're watching your Instagrams and your YouTubes and your TikToks and Reels and stuff, you remember a little bit of the real news. Love you, Dad. Bye.